There is a lot of history behind autism, also known as autism spectrum disorder. What is autism? Autism is a developmental disability caused by differences in the brain. People with ASD often have problems with social communication, interaction, and restricted or repetitive behaviors or interests. People with ASD may also have different ways of learning, moving, or paying attention. In the past, autism had a lot of descriptions, and people used to think it was a form of childhood schizophrenia, and it was assumed that the disorder happened from cold parenting. The term autism was first used in 1908 by German psychiatrist Eugene Bleuler, and it was used to describe a schizophrenic patient who had withdrawn into their own world. According to Bleuler, autistic thinking was characterized by infantile wishes to avoid unsatisfying realities and replace them with fantasies and hallucinations. Autism defined the subject's symbolic inner life and was not readily accessible to observers. Autism was then completely reformulated as a new descriptive category to serve the needs of this new model of child development. In 1943, a physician and psychiatrist named Leo Kanner wrote about how people with autism have speech delays, and even mentions that autistic people are gifted in terms of intelligence and have a great memory. This led Kanner to consider autism a psychiatric condition. He then observed autism as an emotional disturbance rather than a developmental or cognitive one. Kanner's interest in children who found it difficult to relate to others echoed the general interest in all child psychiatrists in the period. His article was significant because it presented a new way to describe infantile thought. Rather than attributing complex unconscious thought processes to children that he observed, he simply described the behavior of a group of children with similar symptoms. He used the word autistic to convey the fact that the children appeared not to be engaged with their external environment. There has been a big increase in diagnosis of autism since the 1960s, both in the UK and in the US. A man named Victor Lauder would study autism, and his first study was a rate of 4.5 per 10,000 children, but a 2006 Lancet article claimed a rate of 116.1 per 10,000 children, and this continues to rise. The first autism organization started in 1965 by Dr. Bernard Rimland. The organization was called the Autism Society. The Autism Society began a nationwide awareness campaign in the early 70s that was adopted by Congress in 1984 and strengthened by the release of the Autism Awareness Ribbon in 1999. The society launched a project to study brain tissue in 1976 and formed a foundation focused on applied research in 1996. And then in 1980, according to the DSM, would describe autism as a pervasive developmental disorder that is separate from schizophrenia and was viewed as a separate diagnosis. In these studies, people with autism can have severe impairment in communication, lack of interest in people, and bizarre responses to the environment, and would have developed within the first 30 months of the person's life. Then in 1994, Asperger's syndrome was added to the DSM as an addition to the autism spectrum in order to represent milder cases where the patients tend to be high functioning. Over the years, there have been a lot of famous people who have had autism before it was given a name. This includes people such as Van Gogh, who made some well-known paintings in history, such as his Starry Night paintings and his self-portraits, Albert Einstein, who would come up with theories of relativity, Tim Burton, who would make movies such as Corpse Bride, Beetlejuice, and The Nightmare Before Christmas, and Temple Grandin, who invented a hug machine that would also be used to calm down cattle. There are a lot of famous people that others do not realize were autistic. There have also been people who have written books and gone public about how they were diagnosed with autism and how they became passionate about what they would do. One example is a man named John Elder Robison, who wrote a book called Look Me in the Eye in 2007. Robison also helped with the band Kiss on the effects they would have in their concerts. This shows that a lot of autistic people, famous or not, can succeed in any area of life. For this documentary, I was privileged to interview an autistic student, a mom with an autistic son, and a sister who has an autistic sibling. This is Randy Kircher. He is getting ready to graduate from a community college in video production. He was diagnosed at age 3 at a preschool.
I was 3 when I was diagnosed with autism. I was diagnosed with it at Oak Ridge Preschool. And my parents got me diagnosed because I had social and behavioral deficits. They didn't know what was going on with me. I couldn't come up with my own phrases. I'd just repeat the phrases I would hear. I'd even read off the screen of the television whenever this old show called Between the Lines read books. And also I had trouble with frustration. Couldn't keep my emotions together. And this showed at the childcare section at my church that we'd go to, and so my parents had me tested at Oak Ridge Preschool. It was a psychologist that tested me, and they made the confirmation that I was on the autism spectrum, that I was on the high functioning end.
What is your social life like?
It depends on who I'm with. My social life is different with my family, with my close friends, with my advisors, and also the people I go to church with. Oftentimes, with my family, I've got the closest bond with them, of course, because they're the people I live with and the people I'm related to. And the people I go to church with, my social norm there is got a sense of humor with them, freely talking to them about what Jesus does to me, how he's walked me through my life. And with my close friends in college and in work, I've got more boundaries there because I don't want to come across as forcing spiritual content down people's throats. I've got a more down-to-earth connection with advisors because it's more of a formal connection. So that's pretty much what my social life is like.
The next person I interviewed is Brandy Parton. She is a mom of an autistic son who was diagnosed at age 9.
When he was officially diagnosed, he was 9, but I had him tested by the same doctor who gave his diagnosis when he was 5, and because a lot of it's social skills, he didn't technically meet the criteria at that time for ADOS, but by the time he was 9, they were expecting him to have those social skills that they didn't expect him to have at 5, and that was when they could officially diagnose him as autistic.
How did you feel when you found out that your child was diagnosed with autism?
It was weird, actually, because it was like I knew it was coming. I knew because, like I said, he had been tested at 5, and the doctor had told me then, he said he would classify him as autistic, but he just didn't technically meet the criteria by the test. So it's not like I didn't really know, but the finality of actually getting the diagnosis, I felt terrified. It was really like a lot of emotion at once. Because then I also felt guilty for feeling that way. But all I could think about was him and how am I going to explain to him and how is his life going to be. It was frustrating to have to take a label for him too, because obviously he's my kid. I don't have a problem with him whatsoever. I think he's perfect like he is. But the rest of the world is not going to see it that way.
So what were the signs that you noticed before he was diagnosed with autism?
The biggest things were mostly at school, at preschool, was the lack of socialization with other kids. He was perfectly fine on the playground alone. He could have cared less about interacting with other kids. And he was in a very small class of about maybe 8 or 10. And they tend to kind of bond with each other when they're that small. He just didn't. The other thing was his interest in blocks. he would only ever play with them one way. He would stack them up, knock them down, stack them up, knock them down. There was no variation to it whatsoever. He's my first kid, and really the first person that I've ever been close with that's autistic. When he would wash his hands, when he was 3 or 4, if he got even the very most edge of his sleeve wet, it had to come off. Haircuts, an absolute nightmare. I mean, it was the sensory part of it. Hand dryers in public restrooms, even the toilet flushing in public restrooms, because it's so much louder, was really bothersome for him, and he was a terrible sleeper.
So what is it like to you having an autistic child?
Well, it's quite interesting. It's fun because he's fun. It's challenging, it's frustrating. But honestly, no more so than my neurotypical kid. I mean, he's challenging and frustrating too. It's just a kid. His school, like me having to deal with the school, has been very difficult. I think that it's hard to get people to, educators, to understand that he's not just a bad kid. He's got some behavior issues, but he has behavior issues because he has other issues that we're not accommodating. He needs an outlet that other kids don't always need. He needs to be able to get up and move. He needs to break away from the noise and the chaos sometimes, just for a few minutes to kind of recollect himself. I can't even imagine what other kids are like to him. The school that he goes to is pretty big. I think that there are some kids that are very nice to him, very good to him, but for every one kid that is, I'd say there's 20 that aren't. And I really feel like he was treated unfairly and poorly. And I kind of feel like that they went a little overboard, although the end result probably was to our benefit, really. I almost feel like he's bullied, not just by students. I feel like he's bullied by adults. So the principal at that time, I felt like was the biggest bully to him. I guess I was really disappointed that somebody who was a principal of an intermediate school would bully a child. And I feel like they bullied me a little bit. They definitely tried to intimidate me.
And lastly, I was able to interview my sister, Savannah Bolz, who has me as an autistic sibling. Did your family ever know that she was autistic?
I don't know that we necessarily knew that she was autistic. I think most of the time it just seemed like you had a weird sense of humor or didn't fully get humor. And the things that you did find funny were different than what other people found funny, and your behaviors were different. But I don't think we necessarily assumed it was autism. I think we just thought you were your own person.
What is it like to have an autistic sibling?
Oh, it's great. I wouldn't trade it, honestly. I'd much rather have an autistic sibling than a normal sibling, if that makes sense. It's entertaining. They're always very, very nice. They always mean well. They always say exactly what they mean, and you can always trust an autistic person. So I love having an autistic sibling. I think it makes my life interesting.
Did you ever notice any signs before your sibling was diagnosed with autism?
Trouble in school, trouble socially. That was definitely a thing. Anger outbursts, struggling with emotions. That was a big thing. So yeah, I mean, there were signs. School is very hard. And that's mostly just because programs aren't really set up to help you. You need the help. It seems like a lot of the time they say that they offer help in programs, but then they make it very, very hard for you to access them, which can make getting an education and furthering your education really hard. Another big thing is just my autistic sibling being able to deal with their emotions and separate their feelings from what they have to do, and being able to calm themselves down and do it anyway, regardless of their emotional response. I mean, I do wish that it was easier for my sibling, because it is hard to be autistic and to be different than everybody else. But I really just am grateful to be able to experience that type of person firsthand.
Since the 1990s, organizations have been made to show support for people who have autism. Some are good organizations and some are not. One of the most known organizations is one of the most hated. Founded in 2005, Autism Speaks' message is that autism is a disease that should be cured or eliminated. The problem with their message is autism is actually a neurological condition that affects the brain differently. It is not a disease and it cannot be cured. The organization even created commercials and films about autism that are very insulting to the autistic community. In 2006, Autism Speaks created a short film documentary called Autism Every Day. In the film, parents of the organization talk about how hard being a parent of an autistic kid can be, and the public did not like the film because of how negatively the people talked about autism. One moment that got people furious was when a member of the organization named Allison Singer talked about wanting to drive her and her autistic daughter off a bridge. In 2009, Singer admitted that she regrets what she said in the film and explained that she said that comment because the New York State Department of Health recommended that her autistic daughter be placed in a school with very poor conditions, and she did not want her daughter to suffer there. However, her comment on the Autism Everyday short will never be forgotten by viewers. In 2009, Autism Speaks released a commercial that was called I Am Autism, and it was directed by Alfonso Cuarón, who directed Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. In the commercial, they talk about autism like it's going to ruin your family because they don't have the perfect child. And like the Autism Everyday short, people were furious about those commercials because of how they talked about autism. John Elder Robeson tried to work with Autism Speaks in 2013, but he explained that Autism Speaks treated him terribly because of how they talked about autistic people. So he ended up leaving the organization. It turns out the organization is ran by no one who is actually autistic and only by parents who have autistic kids. The money Autism Speaks has, only 3% of the money goes to the parents of autistic kids, and 97% of the money is for research on autism, which most of the research is proven to be inaccurate. There are a lot of better organizations out there who did their research on autism. One organization known as Aspies for Freedom in 2005 started using the rainbow infinity sign, which is a symbol of neurodiversity and is used to represent Autistic Pride Day, which happens every June 18th. The reason why they don't use the common symbol for autism, which is the puzzle piece symbol, is because to autistic people, the puzzle piece represents negativity about autism, not a positive perspective of autism. A second issue for autistic people is the puzzle piece also represents viewing them as puzzling or a mystery. Today, autism is handled a lot better than when it first was discovered in the 20th century. More and more people are getting diagnosed with autism, and it results in them getting more help. According to the CDC, more than 75 million people have autism, and autism prevalence have increased 178% since 2000. In 2022, the rate of autism is 1 in 100 compared to 1 in 150 in 2000. Today, a lot of people are coming out with their stories on how they have been diagnosed with autism and the struggles they have dealt with.